Come closer, dear viewer. Rest your weary feet and let the world grow quiet. Tonight, we will not chase battles, nor crown kings, nor stir the dust of old empires. Instead, we shall listen to a gentler tale, the quiet story of coins and money. These little circles of silver and gold, so small they slip through our fingers, have carried the weight of kingdoms, built cathedrals, fed armies, and filled the humble purses of peasants. They have jingled in laughter at taverns, whispered in prayers at churches, and vanished all too quickly in markets. So, let us journey slowly through villages, castles, wars, and wonders and see how the first coins became the lifeblood of the medieval world. Let the sound of history be not a trumpet, but a soft and steady jingle, guiding us gently through time. Welcome viewers, thank you for joining us today on our channel Sleeping Historian. Imagine the world long before shiny coins jingled in pockets, before merchants counted silver by the weight, before kings stamped their faces on metal discs. Long ago, people still traded, still swapped, still bargained. But it was not with money, it was with whatever they had at hand. A farmer with a basket of barley might meet a shepherd with a goat. The farmer wanted milk, the shepherd wanted bread. So, they struck a deal, a bushel of barley for the goat's milk. Fair enough, though one might wonder, how much barley equals one goat? And what if the shepherd's goat was lazy, giving only a trickle of milk? Then came the squabbles. This was called barter, and though it worked, it was never perfect. Imagine trying to trade a wool cloak for a sack of salt. The cloak is heavy, warm, finely woven. The salt is small, grainy, and can vanish in the rain. How do you weigh them against each other? Sometimes people spent more time arguing than trading, and there were problems bigger than fairness. What if you wanted something from a man who didn't need what you offered? You could walk to the next village, and the next, until you found someone who did. But by then your cloak might be soaked, your goat might be tired, and your patience certainly worn thin. So, people searched for things everyone wanted, items that could be traded anywhere. In some lands, salt was so precious it was called white gold. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt, giving us the word salary. In other places, cattle were the measure of wealth. A man's fortune might be counted in cows, which sounds fine until you try to fit your savings into a small purse. Across seas and deserts, shells were valued. The smooth, bright cowrie shell became money in Africa, India, and China. Small, light, and beautiful, they made a pleasant rattle when carried in a pouch. Yet even shells had flaws, too many washing up on the shore, and suddenly your fortune was no greater than pebbles on a beach. Slowly, bit by bit, people learned what made a good form of money. It had to last, so no bread loaves or apples. It had to be small enough to carry, so no oxen. It had to be trusted, so no fake shells carved from bone. Trade needed something steady, something sure, something that spoke the same language in every market. And so, in time, people turned to metals. Metals were rare enough to be valued, yet common enough to be worked. They could be melted, shaped, divided, and most important, measured. A lump of copper or a bar of silver had weight, and that weight carried meaning. Picture a merchant in a marketplace. He does not carry goats or salt. He carries small pieces of silver, cut and weighed. He places them on a balanced scale. The merchant opposite does the same. No need for endless haggling about goats and cloaks. Weight speaks clearly. This was the beginning of money, though not yet coins. These early trades were slow, careful, almost ceremonial. A balanced scale was brought out, weights were placed, metal was measured. Buyers and sellers leaned close, watching that no one slipped in a finger to tip the scale. Trust was everything. A dishonest measure could mean anger, curses, or even blood spilled on the cobblestones. In this world, metal was not yet money stamped by kings. It was raw, cut, sometimes just hacked off chunks called hack silver. Archaeologists have found such pieces buried in Viking hoards. Proof that silver once clinked not as coins but as shards and scraps. And so the stage was set. From barter, to shells, to cattle, to silver weights. Each step brought the world closer to coins. The hunger for something universal, something steady, was growing. And in the quiet hum of medieval markets, in the glow of torchlight and the murmur of bargaining voices, a question floated. What if, someone wondered, this silver could carry a mark, a seal of trust, so no scales are needed every time? But that is for the next part of our tale. For now, remember, money did not begin as coins, nor as bills, nor as numbers glowing on a screen. It began with the simple desire to trade a cloak for salt, a bushel for milk, and to do so without losing your patience or your goat. Imagine a bustling market long ago, not in Europe, not in China, but in a small kingdom called Lydia, tucked in what is today Western Turkey. The air is filled with the smell of roasted lamb, smoke curling from clay ovens, and the shouts of merchants calling out their wares: olive oil, wine, bright fabrics, and spices carried from faraway lands. It is here, more than 2,500 years ago, that something new was born, something small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, yet mighty enough to change the whole course of human history. The world's first true coin. The problem of trust before coins. As you recall, trade often required weighing lumps of silver, counting shells, or haggling endlessly. The problem was trust. One merchant's bar of silver might be purer than another's. One man might clip the edge of his bar, shaving off a little for himself. Another might mix cheap metals inside. Markets thrived on trade, but suspicion followed every deal. A buyer could never be quite sure what he was getting. That was tiring, and sometimes dangerous. What people needed was a way to guarantee the value of metal without weighing it every single time. The Lydians, clever folk that they were, had an idea. What if they said, "We take lumps of metal, melt them down, and stamp them with a mark everyone can trust"? A king's stamp. The metal they chose was not pure gold, nor silver, but a natural mix called electrum, a pale, gleaming alloy found in the rivers of their land. Soft enough to shape, bright enough to catch the eye, rare enough to be valuable. From this electrum, they struck small discs, each with a stamped symbol. Sometimes a lion, sometimes another royal emblem. These marks were not random. They were the seal of the king, a promise that the coin had true weight and purity. Picture it. A merchant selling purple cloth no longer needed to argue about the silver bar's weight. Instead, the buyer handed over a stamped disc. One look at the lion mark, and trust was sealed. The king himself vouched for the value of that coin. And so, trade became faster, smoother, and perhaps most importantly, less exhausting. The coin that traveled what began in Lydia did not stay there long. Traders carried these little discs across seas and deserts, into Greek markets, into Persian bazaars, and with every journey, the idea spread. Stamped coins made life easier. Greek city-states soon followed. Athens struck its famous owl coins, solid silver pieces, with a wise owl's gaze and Athena's face. The coin was so trusted that it spread far beyond Greece, accepted in markets as distant as Egypt and Persia. One could almost say the owl flew farther than any real bird ever could. Persia, too, adopted coins, minting golden derricks and silver sigloi stamped with kings holding bows or spears. These coins carried messages of power, loyalty, and divine right. They were not just money, they were propaganda in shining form. Humor in the market now. Picture the first time an old farmer in Lydia saw these newfangled coins. He might have squinted at the little disc in his palm, scratched his beard, and muttered, "HMPH, doesn't feed the goats." Perhaps he even tried to bite it, just to be sure. Coins were strange at first. But soon enough, when he found he could buy grain, tools, or even a jug of wine with them, his tune would have changed. Coins, in truth, were a little like gossip. They traveled fast, carried messages, and everyone wanted to pass them along. Why Lydia matters now? You might wonder why Lydia? Why not Egypt with its mighty pharaohs, or Babylon with its grand ziggurats? The answer lies in trade. Lydia was a land of crossroads, where east met west, where caravans crossed paths with ships. It was a kingdom that thrived on exchange. In such a place, a faster, safer, more reliable way of trading was worth its weight in gold, or in this case, electrum. The Lydian kings, clever rulers with an eye for innovation, saw this. They stamped their lion symbols into coins, and with that simple act, gave the world one of its greatest inventions. The first jingle. Let us pause for a moment and think of the sound. Before coins, money was heavy clinks of weighed silver, or the quiet passing of shells. Now came a new sound, the jingle of coins. A pouch at the belt, a handful spilling into a palm, the metallic music of trade. That sound was the song of a new age. One could almost say it was the first whisper of what we today call currency, a quiet revolution. The birth of coins may seem small. After all, they were only bits of metal. But in truth, they carried within them a quiet revolution. With coins came standard value, no more endless weighing and testing, faster trade. Markets moved smoothly. Trust. The king's stamp was a promise. Portability. Coins could fit in a pouch instead of a cart. In short, coins made trade easier, safer, and bigger than ever before. Seeds of the future. What Lydia began would grow across centuries. The Greeks, the Persians, the Romans all would strike coins and shape economies with them. Entire empires would rise and fall on the strength of their currency. But at the heart of it all lies this simple truth. Somewhere along a river in Lydia, someone held in their hand the first stamped coin, stared at its little lion, and realized the world of trade had changed forever. And so, viewer, from the clumsy days of barter, from goats and cloaks and hack silver, we step into a new chapter of history. Coins are born, small discs of stamped electrum, carrying trust, carrying power, carrying the voice of kings. The story of money has found its first true shape. The market hums louder, the merchant's pouch jingles brighter, and the farmer's goat well. The goat is probably relieved to no longer be traded quite so often. But the journey has only begun. For as we turn to the next page, we find the Greeks and Persians taking this invention and raising it higher, making coins not only money but art, not only currency but legacy. The coin has begun its long walk through history, and it will never stop. Now we turn the page and enter the world of ancient Greece and mighty Rome, where coins became not just tools, but works of art, voices of power, and symbols of empires. Coins of Greece and Rome. Close your eyes, traveler, and listen. Can you hear it? the sound of sandals striking marble streets, the chatter of voices in the marketplace, the echo of water splashing from a stone fountain. We are in Athens, the cradle of democracy, where wisdom walked in the shade of olive trees and coins sparkled brighter than the sea beyond the Piraeus port. Here, money is no longer just a stamped disc of metal. It is something morale, story, and power melted into silver and gold. The owl of Athens. The Athenians loved wisdom, and wisdom had a face. Athena, goddess of war and craft, protector of the city. On one side of their coins, they stamped her stern, noble profile. On the other, they stamped her companion the owl, wide-eyed and watchful, a bird of knowledge. These owl coins, as they came to be known, were struck in solid silver, heavy, round, and trustworthy. They became one of the most famous currencies of the ancient world. Why? Because everyone believed in them. A merchant in Egypt would accept an Athenian owl just as easily as one in Sicily. The silver was pure, the weight steady, and the design familiar. An owl coin was more than money. It was a little passport, a silent guarantee. With one in your hand, you could buy olive oil, a new cloak, or even hire a small ship to carry you across the Aegean. And imagine the humor of it. An owl, a bird that blinks in the night, becoming the symbol of one of the busiest economies in daylight. Perhaps the Athenians laughed at the thought too, but the owl endured. Greek coins as art. The Greeks did not stop at owls. They saw coins as canvases, small but meaningful. Each city-state stamped its pride onto its currency. Corinth showed the winged horse Pegasus. Rhodes struck coins with the sun god Helios, his radiant face shining like rays across the disk. Syracuse minted coins of such beauty that collectors centuries later would still marvel at them. Coins showing chariots, nymphs, and dolphins swirling in waves. Each coin was like a tiny mural, a story you could carry in your pocket, and though small, these stories traveled far. When soldiers marched, when traders sailed, when pilgrims journeyed, coins went with them. And so, the image of Athena, Pegasus, Helios, and others spread across lands and seas. In this way, coins became ambassadors of culture. A man in Persia, holding an Athenian owl, was holding a piece of Greek pride. A woman in Egypt, counting Rhodian coins, was staring at the rays of Helios. Money spoke, not in words, but in pictures that even strangers could understand. Rome steps in, but Greece was not the only stage. To the west rose a city destined to rule the known world. Rome, at first a small republic, later a mighty empire. Rome did not invent coins, but it made them instruments of power unlike anyone before. The Romans struck coins of copper, silver, and gold. Early ones were plain, but soon emperors realized something clever. Coins could carry their faces. And so, Caesar's profile appeared. Augustus too. One by one, emperors stamped their features on coins, sending their likeness across the empire. A farmer in Gaul, a soldier in Britain, a merchant in Egypt all could see the emperor's face, even if they never came within 100 miles of Rome. This was not just money, this was propaganda. Every coin whispered, "This is your ruler, this is Rome. Remember who commands." Denarii and aurei. The most famous Roman coin was the denarius, made of silver. For centuries it was the backbone of Roman trade. With a denarius you could buy food, wine, sandals, or a day's wage for a laborer. Soldiers were paid in denarii, and their loyalty often jingled in their pouches. Gold coins, called aurei, were rarer, usually reserved for great payments, royal gifts, or the wealthiest dealings. Copper coins, smaller and humbler, were for bread, lamps, and daily necessities. Just as in medieval Europe later on, gold, silver, and copper formed a ladder of value. Each rung matched a rank in society: gold for the elite, silver for merchants and soldiers, copper for the common folk. Humor on the Roman streets now. Imagine the Roman tavern keeper, counting his coins by lamplight. He squints at the emperor's face stamped on each one. Perhaps he grumbles, this emperor looks thinner than the last, less generous too. Maybe the mint is stretching the silver again. Indeed, emperors sometimes did stretch the silver. They mixed cheaper metals into coins, lowering their value while keeping the same stamp. The tavern keeper might not laugh then, for when coins lost their trust, trouble always followed. Coins and soldiers for Rome. Coins were also about loyalty. A general who wished to keep his soldiers happy made sure their pay was steady. Nothing soured an army faster than empty purses. It was said that legions would march for Rome's glory, but they would fight harder if their coin pouches were full. Some emperors even gave special coins as donatives, gifts of gold or silver to the army. A shiny aureus in a soldier's hand was worth more than speeches about honor. Coins across an empire. The Roman Empire stretched vast Britain to Mesopotamia, Spain to Egypt, and across this great expanse, coins tied everything together. A denarius spent in Gaul could buy goods in Judea. A coin struck in Alexandria might travel to the markets of Rome itself. In this way, Rome created something almost like a global currency. Within its borders, money was unified, and that unity helped hold the empire strong. But as centuries passed, Rome weakened. Wars drained the treasury. Emperors grew desperate. They clipped coins, reduced silver, and filled purses with tokens that no longer held the same worth. A soldier who once trusted his denarius now found it lighter, duller, less pure. Merchants began to doubt. Trust faltered, and with it, the strength of the Roman economy. The fall of Rome was not only about armies and invasions, it was also about coins that lost their shine, money that lost its trust. So, listeners, from the bright owls of Athens to the stern profiles of Roman emperors, coins became more than trade. They became art, message, and command. They told stories of gods and heroes, but also whispered of power and control. The Greeks gave coins beauty, the Romans gave them authority. Together, they set the pattern for centuries. Money was not just a tool of exchange, it was a mirror of the world itself. And though both Greece and Rome would fade, their coins remain. Buried in soil, found in hoards, displayed in museums, they still whisper their stories, still show their faces, still jingle faintly with the memory of ancient markets. The world would never again be without coins. We'll move gently forward into the medieval age now, where coins became the heartbeat of villages, fairs, and castles. Listeners, step with me into a medieval town square. The morning mist is lifting. The church bells toll softly, and the cobblestones are already alive with footsteps. Farmers carry baskets of apples and onions. Bakers bring loaves still warm from the oven. Tanner's drag hides that smell far less pleasant. Children dart between stalls. And somewhere in the corner, a fiddler plays a tune that makes even the grumpiest trader tap his boot. This is the marketplace of the Middle Ages, the true beating heart of the community. And here, in the clatter of voices and the smell of roasted meat and straw, one coin reigns supreme: the penny. The humble penny. The medieval penny, often made of silver, was small, thin, and light, but it held mighty power. For many centuries in Europe, it was almost the only coin that truly mattered. Bigger coins were rare, smaller coins were hardly minted. So, the penny was stretched to cover nearly every deal. A man might buy bread with a penny, or pay a servant's wages, or even make a donation at the church door. Of course, the value of a penny changed with time and place, but in its day, it was enough to matter to rich and poor alike, and because it had to do so much, the penny was often cut. Yes, cut. Imagine a coin sliced into halves or quarters, like a pie. These half pennies and farthing pieces, a quarter of a penny, rattled in the pockets of villagers. Used for the smallest trades, children no doubt were quite happy to receive a farthing in exchange for running errands. The penny and the peasant to the peasant farmer, the penny was more than metal. It was sweat from the brow, soil from the field, calluses on the hands. A whole day of labor might earn just a few pennies. With those, a man could buy bread, salt, and perhaps a little ale, if he was lucky. Picture a weary plowman at the tavern, laying down his hard-earned penny for a cup of ale. He sips slowly, savoring every drop, while behind him the fiddler plays. He knows the penny will not stretch far, but for that evening, it is enough to bring warmth and laughter. For peasants, the penny was survival. Too few, and the winter grew cruel. Enough, and life though hard could be endured. The penny and the church. The church, too, loved the penny. A man's tithe was often measured in pennies. A candle for the altar, a penny. A prayer for the soul of the departed, perhaps a penny more. Priests taught that giving pennies to the poor was a holy duty. And so, even the smallest coin could become a gift of mercy. Pilgrims dropped pennies into shrines as offerings, sometimes leaving them beside relics of saints. One could almost say the sound of faith in medieval Europe was the soft clink of pennies falling onto church plates. Markets and fairs. Markets were not just daily gatherings. Great fairs drew crowds from far and wide. Merchants set up colorful tents, displaying fabrics, spices, wines, and trinkets from distant lands. Jugglers performed, minstrels sang, and hawkers shouted until their voices cracked. At these fairs, pennies flew from hand to hand. A child bought honey cakes, a lady purchased ribbons, a knight bargained for a new scabbard. Somewhere, a sly merchant tried to pass off clipped penny coins, shaved at the edges so that less silver remained. If caught, he might lose more than just his reputation. Medieval justice could be sharp indeed. Yet despite cheats and quarrels, markets thrived because of the penny. Without it, trade would have stumbled. With it, life bustled. Humor in the marketplace now. Imagine the gossip of the day. A merchant sells a jug of ale for a penny, only to find it paid in halfpennies and farthings, each one clipped and worn thin. He squints, sighs, and mutters, "By St. Peter's beard, this purse is heavier than the ale I sold." Coins were small, but the arguments they caused could be large. Still, in the end, everyone found a way to agree, for without trade, the market would fall silent. The king's face on the penny. Kings understood the power of the penny. To stamp one's face upon a coin was to send a message. This is my land. This is my law. This coin is my promise. Across England, France, and beyond, monarchs had their images struck into silver pennies. Some looked noble. Others looked, well, rather lopsided, if truth be told. Engraving tools were not always kind. But perfect or not, the king's profile traveled farther than any herald could ride, and with it came trust or mistrust. For if a king debased the coin, mixing cheap metals in his face became a mockery. People soon learned to bite their pennies, testing their purity with teeth. A coin that bent too easily was quickly doubted. The penny injustice because money was so central, laws about coins were fierce. In England, for instance, counterfeiting was not just a crime, it was treason. To fake the king's coin was to insult the king himself. Punishments were brutal, hands cut off, or worse. This harshness may sound grim, but it showed just how sacred the penny had become. It was no longer just silver, it was authority, order, and power. Daily life in pennies. Let us wander back to our medieval town. Picture a day in pennies. A loaf of bread to 1 penny, a jug of ale, 1 penny, a candle for prayer, half a penny, rent for a small cottage, a few pennies each week. Life was counted in pennies, step by step, coin by coin. And when pennies grew scarce, debt grew heavy. A poor man might borrow, but if he could not repay, he could lose land, tools, or freedom itself. Some fell into serfdom because of pennies owed. Others rose, carefully saving pennies until they could buy land, freedom, or a place in the guilds. Thus, the penny could be both chain and key. The medieval penny may look humble to our eyes today, thin-worn, often chipped, but in its time, it was the lifeblood of Europe. It jingled in the pouches of peasants, clinked on church altars, and rang in the purses of merchants at fairs. It was the coin of survival, the coin of worship, the coin of law. And though small, it carried a weight far greater than its size. So when next you see a simple silver penny in a museum, pause a moment, listen closely. Perhaps, just perhaps, you will hear the echo of bells in a medieval market, the laughter of peasants with ale in hand, and the soft, steady jingle of the coin that kept the Middle Ages alive. Let's keep walking slowly through history together. We've just left the noisy medieval markets, where the penny ruled everyday life. Now, we step into the world of merchants, guild halls, and men who dared to lend money when others called it sinful. The rise of merchant guilds and moneylenders. The marketplace we visited earlier was full of laughter, bargaining, and the jingle of pennies. But behind the noise of trade, something larger was stirring, something that would shape medieval towns and even kingdoms. It was the rise of the guilds and the men who held the strange power of lending money. So let us wander, traveler, into the narrow lanes of a medieval town, where the timber-bird houses lean like gossiping neighbors, and the smell of roasted meat mingles with the sharper scent of tanned leather. Somewhere ahead, a hall stands proud, its carved doors marked with the crest of a guild. What were guilds? Guilds were brotherhoods of workers and merchants. Imagine them as clubs, but not the sort where you sit and play cards. These were serious, powerful groups. If you were a blacksmith, you joined the blacksmith's guild. If you brewed ale, you joined the brewer's guild. And if you traded cloth, spices, or silverware, you joined the guild of merchants. A guild was family, protection, and authority, all rolled into one. It set the rules: who could sell what prices should be fair, how to treat customers, and most importantly, who was allowed to join. If you were not part of a guild, good luck selling in the town square. You might be chased out before you could sell a single loaf of bread. The merchant guilds. Among all guilds, the merchant guilds shone brightest. These were not simple craftsmen, they were travelers, traders, and risk-takers. Merchant guilds controlled entire towns, negotiating with kings, hiring guards to protect caravans, and sometimes even owning ships. Picture a hall filled with merchants wearing fine cloaks, their tables spread with maps, scales, and ledgers. They discuss trade routes, plan fairs, and boast about the goods they brought from faraway places. Cloth from Flanders, spices from the East, wine from the vineyards of France. To the common peasant, these wares seemed almost magical. But to the merchants, they were business, weighed carefully in pounds of silver and pennies of profit. A day in the guild. The guild hall was a place of rules and rituals. Apprentices, young boys with ink-stained fingers, ran errands for the masters. Journeymen, who had finished their training but not yet gained full membership, worked hard to prove themselves. And masters, the full members of the guild, sat proudly in their seats of honor. The guild kept strict order. If you cheated a customer, the guild punished you. If you sold poor quality goods, the guild fined you. But if you followed the rules, the guild protected you. No thief dared rob a merchant under guild protection, for the punishment would be swift. In many towns, the guild hall was grander than the church. Its banners hung high, its feasts were legendary, and its influence reached deep into law and politics. Humor in the guild. Guild meetings were not always solemn. Imagine a merchant trying to boast about the silk he bought from Italy, only for another to interrupt. Silk, you say? A pity the moths loved it more than your customers. Laughter roared around the table. For all their rules and seriousness, merchants were still men who enjoyed their jokes, their ale, and their pride. The rise of money. While guilds protected trade, there was another force in medieval towns that grew just as powerful, though far more controversial. These were the moneylenders. Now, lending money was a dangerous business. The church frowned on it. To charge interest was called usury, a sin. Better to give charity, priests said, than to profit from another's need. And yet, moneylenders were everywhere. Why? Because trade needed them. A merchant could not sail to Venice or ride to Bruges without coin. A king could not raise an army without borrowing silver, and peasants, desperate after a poor harvest, often turned to lenders as their last hope. The Jewish moneylenders in many medieval towns. Jewish families became known for money lending, barred from owning land or joining many guilds. They turned to trade and finance. And while the church forbade Christians from charging interest, Jewish lenders were not bound by the same rules. This gave them a strange, risky role, necessary, but often resented. Kings and nobles borrowed heavily from Jewish lenders, but when debts grew too large, anger flared. Too often, Jewish communities were scapegoated, blamed, or driven out entirely. Their story is one of courage, survival, and tragedy in equal measure. The Lombards and other lenders, not only Jewish families, lent money. Italian bankers, especially the Lombards, became famous across Europe for their lending houses. They used clever tricks, calling interest fees or exchange rates, to avoid the church's anger. Their methods spread, and slowly, moneylending began to look less like sin and more like skill. The merchant and the moneylender. Let us imagine a scene. A wool merchant, eager to buy more cloth, visits the house of a moneylender. The room smells of parchment and ink. A chest of coins sits in the corner, its lock gleaming. "I need 10 pounds of silver," the merchant says. The moneylender strokes his beard. "And when will you return it?" "By Michaelmas," replies the merchant. "And with a gift, perhaps?" The merchant nods reluctantly. "A gift of 2 pounds. And so, the deal is struck. Both know it is interest, though neither dares call it by that name. The merchant leaves with silver, the lender with a promise on, both with risk. Debt and desperation for some. Moneylenders were saviors. For others, they were chains. A poor farmer, borrowing to survive the winter, might find himself unable to repay. His land, his tools, even his freedom could be lost. Debt was feared almost as much as hunger. A man in debt carried shame, and sometimes the weight passed to his children. Yet without lenders, many could not have survived at all. Guilds and lenders in power. By the later Middle Ages, guilds and moneylenders held enormous power. Guilds shaped towns, lenders shaped kingdoms. Kings borrowed vast sums for wars. Merchants borrowed to fund ships. Even cathedrals were built with borrowed silver. At times, guilds and lenders worked together. At others, they clashed. But together, they wove the fabric of medieval economy. Humor in debt. Imagine a farmer explaining his debt to his wife. "I borrowed a penny, and now I owe 2. By Christmas, I'll owe 4. By Easter, I'll owe the whole farm." His wife sighs and replies, "Then perhaps by next winter, you'll owe the devil himself, and he'll take you instead of the cow." Debt was no laughing matter, but humor softened the pain. The legacy the guilds gave us the roots of modern business. They shaped towns into centers of trade, law, and craft. And the moneylenders, though mistrusted, laid the foundation of banking. Together, they turned Europe from a land of scattered villages into a world of bustling markets and international trade. Their influence stretched far beyond their lifetimes. So when you picture a medieval town, do not think only of the jingle of pennies in the market square. Think also of the guild halls, where rules were written and feasts held. Think of the moneylenders' ledgers, ink-stained and heavy with promises. Think of the men and women who balanced risk and reward, building the first stones of the modern economy. We now step into the lands of Italy, where marble palaces rise above the canals and narrow streets echo with the clatter of trade. The guilds and moneylenders we've met have paved the way, and now comes something greater still: the first true banks. The first banks of Florence and Venice. Close your eyes, dear listener, and let us sail down the Adriatic Sea. The water shimmers like polished silver. Gondolas glide through narrow canals, and tall towers rise above the misty lagoon. This is Venice, the queen of the Adriatic, where merchants from east and west meet in a swirl of silks, spices, and silver coins. Further inland, across rolling Tuscan hills, lies Florence, a city of art, learning, and cunning merchants. Together, these two cities gave birth to something that would change the world forever: the bank. What is a bank? In simple words, a bank is a place where money sleeps. People bring their coins and leave them in safety, like hens laying their golden eggs in another's basket. And when they return, not only are the eggs still there, but sometimes there are more. But in medieval Italy, banks were more than safes. They were nerve centers of trade. They moved money across seas, lent silver to kings, and even whispered into the ears of popes. And who were the men behind them? Families with names that still echo today: Medici, Peruzzi, Bardi, and Fugger. They were not merely bankers. They were power itself, cloaked in fine robes, their fingers ink-stained from counting ledgers, rather than swinging swords. The problem before banks: why did banks even arise? Let us think. Imagine you are a Florentine merchant in the 13th century. You wish to buy silk from Constantinople. To pay for it, you would need to carry heavy sacks of silver all the way across seas, through pirate-infested waters and bandit-ridden roads. A dangerous task. One storm could sink your fortune to the bottom of the sea. One thief could end your business with a single knife in the dark. Wouldn't it be easier to carry not silver, but paper? And so, banks became masters of the written word. Instead of carrying chests of coins, merchants carried letters of exchange, small pieces of parchment that promised payment in another city. It was like magic. Silver in Florence could become silver in Venice without ever touching the road. The Lombard tables, the word bank itself, comes from the banco, the wooden bench used by Italian money changers. In the marketplaces of Florence or Venice, men sat at these benches, weighing coins, exchanging currencies, and scribbling notes. When a banker failed, his bench was broken in public. From this comes the word bankruptly, bench broken, a sad fate, though perhaps less painful than losing one's head. Venice, the merchant's haven. Venice was born of trade. Its streets were canals, its ships were countless, and its merchants were sharp as hawks. The Venetians traded with Byzantines, Muslims, and Mongols, and they needed money to flow as swiftly as their ships. Venetian bankers developed clever systems of credit. Instead of weighing out coins each time, merchants could simply transfer balances within a banker's ledger. A merchant selling pepper could be paid in Venice, not with coins in hand, but with numbers written in a book. This was revolutionary. Money no longer needed to clink in your pouch to be real. It could exist as ink on a page. Florence, the heart of banking. If Venice was the sea queen, Florence was the banker's throne. Its wool and cloth trade brought riches, but it was banking that made Florence legendary. The great Florentine families Peruzzi, Bardi, and later, the Medici perfected the art of banking. They lent to kings, funded wars, and even managed the money of the Pope himself. But lending to kings was dangerous work. Kings were notorious for borrowing much and paying little. When the English king Edward III defaulted on his debts in the 14th century, the mighty Peruzzi and Bardi banks collapsed. Thousands lost their savings. Florence learned the hard way. Even crowns cannot always be trusted. The Medici, bankers of popes, among all Florentine bankers, none rose higher than the Medici family. With their careful books, political cunning, and patronage of the arts, the Medici became rulers in all but name. They financed cathedrals, sponsored artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, and even produced popes. Their banks stretched across Europe, from London to Bruges, from Rome to Constantinople. The Medici knew how to use both coin and influence. They taught Europe that money was not merely for buying bread or wool, it was a tool of power, able to shape kingdoms and guide history. Humor in banking, of course. Banking was not without its jokes. Imagine a Florentine banker sighing as he closes his ledger. A king's promise is worth less than a cobbler's boots. At least the boots keep out the rain. Or a Venetian merchant complaining, "My banker charges me to keep my silver safe, then he charges me again when I take it back. By the end, I might as well have let the pirates steal it." Even in the age of ledgers and letters of exchange, humor softened the sting of fees and debts. Letters of exchange. Perhaps the greatest gift of Italian banking was the letter of exchange. A merchant in Florence could deposit silver with a banker, receive a letter, and travel safely to Bruges or Paris. There another banker in the same network would honor the letter and pay him. It was medieval magic, though in truth it was mathematics and trust. These letters allowed trade to flourish across Europe, without the constant fear of robbery. And slowly, money began to live less in purses and more in paper. The suspicion of banks. Not everyone trusted banks. Some whispered that bankers were greedy, sinful, and dangerous. The church still frowned at interest. And ordinary folks sometimes thought bankers made money from nothing but ink and promises. Too many peasants, a coin you could bite with your teeth was real, but a note written on parchment, that seemed trickery, like alchemy. And yet, trade grew. And as it grew, so did banks. Banks as power. By the late Middle Ages, banks in Florence and Venice held power greater than many kings. They could fund wars, decide which merchants thrived, and even sway the papacy. A city with a strong bank could command armies. A family with a strong bank could build palaces. Money no longer moved only in sacks of silver, it moved in the invisible world of ledgers and trust. Legacy of Florence and Venice. From the wooden benches of Lombard money changers to the marble halls of Florentine bankers, the idea of banking took root. Venice taught the world to trust balances written in books. Florence showed how a family of bankers could rule cities and shape history. The first banks were not only places where money slept, they were places where money dreamed dreams of ships crossing seas, cathedrals rising to heaven, and kingdoms built on borrowed silver. So next time you pass a bank in your own town, with its glass doors and quiet clerks, remember the story of Florence and Venice. Behind the computers and modern accounts lies a history of wooden benches, ink-stained ledgers, and men who risked everything on the power of trust. And perhaps, just perhaps, if you listen closely in the silence of a bank, you may hear the faint scratch of a quill on parchment and the clink of coins being counted in a Florentine hall long ago. Now, dear listener, we turn the page to a new chapter. We've walked through the world of coins, guilds, and banks, but here comes something lighter, stranger, and at first unbelievable. Money made of paper? The spread of paper money in the East and West. Let us drift eastward beyond the Alps, past the deserts, and across the wide steppes, into the great empire of China. Here, in a world of dragons, jade, and silk, people dared something so bold it sounded like a jester's joke. They began to pay not with silver or gold, but with slips of paper. The beginning in China, it started with merchants in the Temps dynasty. Around the 7th century, though it grew most famous under the Song dynasty, a few centuries later, China was vast, its markets bursting with rice, tea, porcelain, and silk. Carrying copper coins for long distances was a burden, like trying to walk across a kingdom with a sack of stones on your back. So, merchants began leaving their heavy coins with trusted deposit shops. In exchange, they received written receipts. These receipts could be traded like money. Later, the government stepped in and said, why not make these slips official? And so the world's first paper money was born. The Chinese called it zhuozi. It was light, easy to carry, and far less clanky than sacks of copper. For a time, it was a miracle. Marco Polo's astonishment. When the Venetian traveler Marco Polo journeyed to the court of Kublai Khan in the 13th century, he was astonished. He described how the great Khan's money was not gold, nor silver, but bark from the mulberry tree, pressed into sheets and stamped with imperial seals. Polo wrote with awe, the people of Cathay use for their money the bark of trees, which is cut into pieces. And upon these pieces the great lord, whose seal they bear, commands that all shall accept them as payment. To Polo, it seemed like sorcery. Imagine, bark from a tree, worth as much as gold. Surely, readers in Europe thought he was exaggerating, or perhaps had spent too much time breathing in the spices of the East. Why paper money worked? The magic of paper money was not in the paper itself. Of course, a slip of paper by itself is as worthless as a note scribbled by a drunk scribe. The power lay in trust. People believed in the emperor's authority, in the government's promise that this paper was worth something real. As long as everyone agreed, the system worked. And indeed, for centuries, China thrived under paper currency, long before Europe dared try the same. Trouble with paper, but paper money had its dangers. What if too much was printed? What if people lost faith in it? At times, Chinese rulers grew greedy, flooding markets with fresh notes. Prices rose, coins vanished, and people grew suspicious. Paper money was like a delicate bird, beautiful while it flew, but quick to tumble if handled without care. The West's skepticism, meanwhile, in medieval Europe, the idea of paper money sounded absurd. A Florentine merchant trusted silver, gold, or at least a letter of exchange from a respected banker, but paper by itself, that seemed like a trick for fools. Why should I take your paper, a Venetian might say, when I can bite a coin with my teeth and know it is real? Europe was slower to trust. For centuries, banks dealt in metal, not paper. The memory of Marco Polo's tale remained, but it was treated more like a curiosity than a lesson. The Mongol connection paper money did, however, travel westward through the Mongol Empire. The Mongols, ruling vast lands from China to Persia, used paper notes in some regions. Yet outside of Asia, it never caught on strongly. Metal remained the trusted master of trade. Humor of paper. One can imagine the jokes in a medieval tavern. A merchant waves a slip of paper at the innkeeper. This, he says proudly, is worth a sack of gold. The innkeeper snorts. Then why not use it to light the fire? And I'll take the gold instead. Paper money was, too many, laughable, till centuries later, when it became the backbone of modern finance. Europe's first steps, Europe's first real flirtations with paper money, came much later, around the 17th century. In Sweden, the Stockholm Banco issued notes in the 1660s. The notes promised to pay their holders in silver, but soon the bank issued too many, and it collapsed in disgrace. England followed cautiously, with the Bank of England issuing its first notes in 1694. These, too, were promises. Paper that could be redeemed for metal. They were not quite the bark of mulberry trees, but the principle was the same. The idea had finally arrived in Europe, but it took nearly 500 years after China. East and West compared. The difference between East and West was striking. In China, paper money was centuries old, born from the needs of a vast empire. In Europe, coins and banking families ruled, and paper was seen as fragile until much later. Yet slowly, the West learned, and once it did, paper money would grow beyond anything the East had imagined, fueling global empires, revolutions, and modern economies. The secret ingredient? Trust at the heart of it all, whether in a Chinese marketplace or an English tavern. Money, whether coin or paper, relied on trust. A coin carried trust in its metal. Paper carried trust in a king, a bank, or an empire. Without trust, money is nothing but metal lumps or tree bark. With trust, it becomes power. So next time you glance at a dollar bill, or a euro note, or any slip of paper with numbers and faces upon it, remember the mulberry trees of China. Remember the astonishment of Marco Polo. Remember the laughter of Europeans who thought it folly. And then remember this. What once seemed a trick became the very breath of trade. A soft, weightless thing, paper proved stronger than iron when carried on the wings of trust. Dear listener, we now wander into the heart of medieval piety, where pilgrims shuffle on dusty roads, relics gleam in candlelight, and coins ring not only in markets but also at holy shrines. Coins of faith, pilgrims, relics, and the currency of belief. Picture, if you will, the roads of medieval Europe. They are long, winding, and not always safe. Yet along these roads, you see countless travelers with staffs in hand, scallop shells pinned to their cloaks, and small purses of coins tied firmly at their belts. These are the pilgrims, men and women who walk not for trade or war, but for the sake of their souls. And where pilgrims walked, money followed. The pilgrim's journey. A pilgrim might leave his village with little more than a walking stick, a cloak, and a pouch of pennies. His goal could be Canterbury, Santiago, the Compostela Rome, or even far-off Jerusalem. Along the way, he would need food, shelter, and safe passage, none of which came free. The journey of faith was also a journey of money. Every inn, every ferry, every candle lit in a chapel took its share of the pilgrim's purse. Some said the sound of coins clinking in a pilgrim's pouch was almost as constant as the prayers on his lips. Pilgrim badges at great shrines. Pilgrims bought badges, small pewter tokens stamped with holy symbols. A scallop shell from Santiago, a tiny cross from Jerusalem, or a saint's image from Canterbury. These badges were souvenirs, proof of the journey, and also little businesses in themselves. Craftsmen sold thousands of these trinkets, and pilgrims eagerly paid. For some, they were badges of honor. For others, they were like saying, "I was there," long before postcards existed. Humor often crept in. Imagine a man coming home with 10 different badges on his cloak, his wife eyeing him suspiciously. You went to pray, husband, or to shop? Relics, and their riches even greater than badges, were the relics. Pieces of saints' bones, scraps of robes, drops of holy blood, these drew pilgrims like bees to honey. A shrine with a famous relic became a treasure chest, not only of devotion, but also of coin. Cathedrals and monasteries grew rich from offerings. Pilgrims dropped pennies, florins, and ducats into chests, believing their souls would shine brighter for the gift. Some relics were genuine, others less so. There were said to be enough splinters of the true cross scattered across Europe to build a ship. But whether true or false, relics drew the faithful and their money. The economy of pilgrimage. Entire towns thrived on pilgrimages. Inns, taverns, and merchants lined the roads to shrines. A town with a holy site was a town with business. Bread sellers, innkeepers, blacksmiths, and even pickpockets all benefited from the constant flow of travelers. Pilgrimage was not just spiritual, it was an economy. And the coins that passed through pilgrims' hands became part of a vast system of belief-driven trade. Coins with holy marks. Some coins themselves carried religious images. Kings stamped crosses, saints, and holy words upon them. It reminded all who spent the coins that wealth and faith were bound together. To a peasant, holding a penny marked with a cross was like holding a tiny blessing. To a king, it was a reminder that his power came by the grace of God and by the wealth of his treasury. Pardons and indulgences later. As the medieval world grew more complex, money and faith mixed in stranger ways. The church offered indulgences, pardons for sins, in exchange for donations. A preacher might cry in a town square, "Give a coin, and your soul finds mercy," and so coins dropped like rain. Some gave gladly, others grumbled, and some mocked. A man may sin all week, one jester said, so long as he keeps a purse for Sunday. Though it brought wealth to churches, indulgences also bred resentment, and in time they would spark great upheaval in Europe. Humor on the road. Pilgrims, weary from miles of walking, often joked about their money. One might say, "The road takes my strength, the inn takes my coin, and the shrine takes what little I have left. Only my blisters are truly mine." Another would reply, "Then be thankful, for at least blisters cost nothing." Even in hardship, laughter traveled with the pilgrims, just as surely as their coins did. Pilgrims as carriers of wealth. Pilgrimage routes became rivers of silver. A pilgrim might carry French pennies, Spanish maravedis, or English groats, and along the way, money flowed across borders. Pilgrims spread not only prayers but also currencies, knitting together the economy of Christendom. In this way, pilgrimage helped coins travel further than armies. A penny offered at Canterbury might once have rung in Paris or Rome. Money, like faith, was a traveler. Sacred and profane, yet not all looked kindly on this mingling of coin and prayer. Some monks complained that shrines had become marketplaces, more eager for offerings than for prayers. Saints should be honored, one friar said bitterly, but not sold like fish in the market. Still, the coins kept coming, for faith and hope are stronger than cynicism. Legacy of faith's currency. By the end of the Middle Ages, pilgrimage had left its mark, not only on souls but on Europe's economy. Cathedrals rose from pilgrim offerings. Towns thrived on their spending, and coins stamped with crosses jingled as reminders that faith and money, for better or worse, were deeply entwined. So, dear listener, the next time you hear the word pilgrimage, do not think only of prayers whispered on dusty roads. Think also of the small purses of coins tied to belts, the pilgrim badges shining on cloaks, the offerings dropped into wooden chests, and the laughter shared at roadside inns. For in the medieval world, even faith had its currency. And the story of coins was not just about kings and merchants, but also about pilgrims, relics, and the quiet hope that a single penny given in devotion might buy a place closer to heaven. Let us journey onward, into the glittering halls of power. where kings stamped their faces into silver and gold. And coins became more than money, they became little crowns carried in every purse. The coinage of kings, power, propaganda, and prestige in the medieval world. A king's command might not always reach the far edges of his land. Castles stood like islands, roads were long, and messengers rode slowly. But there was one voice of the king that traveled everywhere, slipping into the hands of peasants, merchants, pilgrims, and knights alike: the coin. Every time a man bought bread or a woman paid a blacksmith, the king's face looked back at them, stamped in silver or copper. Coins were the whisper of power, a daily reminder that the realm was bound together by both crown and currency. A king's portrait in every purse, long before posters or printed books. Coins were a ruler's best advertisement. Some showed the king's face, others his seal or heraldry. Even if a peasant never set eyes on his ruler, he still knew what he looked like: in nose, stern brow, crown perched high. Of course, whether the likeness was flattering or not depended on the mintmaster's skill. A few coins made kings look majestic. Others, well, let us say, more like potatoes wearing crowns. Still, to hold a coin was to hold a piece of the king's image, carried into every village, market, and tavern. Royal pride in metal. Kings loved nothing more than to boast through their coinage. Some struck their titles in bold letters, others filled coins with symbols of victory. An English penny might read Henricus Rex with a cross shining at its center. A French denier might declare the strength of the fleur-de-lis. In the Holy Roman Empire, the eagle spread its wings across silver like a bird of prey, guarding the wealth of emperors. Coins were not only for spending, they were for showing off. Imagine a monarch thumping his chest and saying, "Look here, good people, my face in silver is worth more than your ox." Propaganda in your pocket. Coins were medieval propaganda in miniature. Where scrolls could be burned and heralds ignored, coins endured. They clinked in pockets and purses, reminding everyone who ruled. If a king wanted to claim divine right, he stamped crosses and saints. He wanted to celebrate a victory, he minted coins, showing swords, crowns, or even captured cities. Coins whispered messages day and night. Your king is mighty, your king is blessed. Your king has gold enough to mint and still demand taxes. Wars paid in silver. Kings were forever at war against neighbors, rivals, or sometimes their own barons. And war was hungry. Armies needed food, armor, horses, and drink. The clink of coins paid for all. During campaigns, soldiers often cared more for wages than causes. A knight might ask, "Who do we fight for today, sire?" The king replied, "For honor." The knight muttered, "So long as honor pays in silver." And so treasuries bled, silver poured into soldiers' purses, and the royal face on every coin marched as surely as the men themselves. Debasing the realm, but a king's pride could also become his downfall. When treasuries ran dry, rulers sometimes debased their coins, mixing silver with cheaper metals. The coins still shone bright, but weighed lighter, worth less. Merchants grumbled, peasants muttered, and trust cracked. It was like watering down wine. It fooled no one for long. As one tavern keeper joked, "The king's coin tastes like thin, aleless bite." More disappointment. Debased coins traveled poorly to foreign merchants, sniffed at them, and demanded stronger silver or gold. Thus a kingdom's coin could tarnish not only its value, but its honor. Prestige in gold for true magnificence. Kings minted in gold. Gold coins were rare, shining like captured sunlight. They were not for peasants, but for nobles, lords, and great merchants. To give gold was to give glory. A king might gift golden florins to his allies or reward faithful knights. To hold such a coin was to feel the weight of royal favor in your palm. Florins, ducats, nobles, these golden treasures gleamed across Europe, symbols not only of wealth but of grandeur. The royal mint coins did not appear by magic. Behind every royal penny was a mint. Great workshops of clanging hammers and glowing furnaces. Their metal was melted, cut, stamped, and tested. Mintmasters served the crown with loyalty, though some cheated, shaving silver or keeping extra scraps. Woe to the mintmaster caught. Punishments could be severe. A bad coin insulted not only the people but the king himself. Thus, every good coin was both a craftsman's labor and a monarch's pride. Kings and rival coins. Kings also hated the coins of rivals. If foreign money flowed too freely, it threatened their control. So some banned outside coins or demanded heavy taxes to exchange them. Others, bolder, copied the best designs to keep wealth from slipping abroad. A peasant might grumble, "What does it matter whose face is on the coin, so long as it buys me bread?" But to kings coinage was power, and power was never shared lightly. Humor in the market. Among the common folk, coins inspired many a joke. "Look," one peasant said, holding up a coin, "the king frowns, even here. Must be, he heard what I paid for eggs." Another replied, "Nay, he frowns, because you still owe him taxes." Thus coins carried not only royal pride, but also the laughter of those who spent them, passing jokes along with silver. A realm bound by coin. In the end, a king's coinage stitched his realm together. Castles showed might, banners showed color, but coins were constant companions. A coin passed from knight to merchant, from merchant to farmer, from farmer to priest. In every exchange, the king's image and name traveled with it, tying village to village, city to city, and heart to crown. The coin was the king's voice, the king's boast, and sometimes the king's trick. But always, it was tiny circles of metal that ruled as surely as swords or crowns. Thus, the story of money is also the story of kings. For in the medieval world, no coin left the mint without a monarch's pride stamped upon it. Marvelous. So we now wander from the glitter of royal courts to the bustling hum of town squares, docks, and guild halls. Coins no longer whisper only of kings, but of merchants, craftsmen, and traders who spun webs of commerce across medieval lands. The merchant's coin, trade, guilds, and the rise of commerce. The clatter of hooves, the cry of hawkers, the smell of spice and smoke welcome to the medieval market. Here, coins danced faster than knights' swords. A copper penny bought bread, a silver groat fetched cloth, and gold ducats changed hands, in quiet corners over more serious business. While kings stamped their faces into coin, it was merchants and guilds who breathed daily life into those tiny discs of metal. For in markets and fairs, it was not honor or prophecy that counted, but profit. The great medieval market picture the town square at dawn. Stalls rise, tables groan under heaps of wool, cheese, fish, and pottery. A fiddler plays for tips, dogs chase crumbs, and coins change hands faster than gossip. Markets were the heartbeat of towns. Farmers brought produce, craftsmen displayed wares, and travelers brought strange goods: silk, pepper, saffron from faraway lands. And through it all, coins clinked like music. Each exchange was a little performance. The weighing of money, the squint at foreign silver, the haggling that could last longer than the transaction itself. Guilds and their coins. Guilds, those proud brotherhoods of craftsmen and merchants, ruled the markets. Bakers, weavers, masons, smiths, each guarded its trade like a knight guards his sword. Guild members often used their own tokens or tallies to keep accounts. In some towns, these tokens became so trusted that they passed almost like coins. A baker's token promised bread, a weaver's token promised cloth. One could almost say guilds minted their own currencies, soft and local, bound by trust. After all, who would dare cheat the guild, knowing 100 craftsmen stood ready to defend its honor? Merchant humor. Merchants were sharp of wit and tongue. One might say, a king makes a coin by decree, but a merchant makes it worth spending. Another, weighing a suspicious penny, might mutter, "This coin feels lighter than a friar's fast." Their humor kept the market lively, for in trade, laughter was as useful as silver. Fairs of fortune. Beyond weekly markets came the great fairs. Stalls stretched for miles, music rang, banners waved, and merchants from many lands gathered. The champagne fairs in France, for example, were legendary. There Italian bankers, Flemish cloth sellers, and German traders met, their purses heavy with many kinds of coin. At such fairs, money flowed like rivers. Deals were struck that tied cities together. Coins traveled across borders, and sometimes entire kingdoms felt the echo of what was spent beneath those colorful tents. Coins across borders for merchants. Coins were not just local symbols of kings but tools of trade. A French denier might buy Flemish cloth. An English groat might pay for wine from Bordeaux. A Venetian ducat might sail as far as the Levant. Of course, not all coins were trusted equally. Merchants carried scales, weighed silver, and argued fiercely over values. Sometimes, barter still reared its stubborn head. "I'll give you 2 sacks of wool for that cask of wine, and not a penny more." Yet slowly, coins became the common language of trade. The rise of banking. As trade grew, so too did the bankers, especially in Italian cities like Florence, Venice, and Genoa. These clever folk learned that money could travel on paper, not just in purses. A merchant could deposit coins in Florence, receive a letter of credit, and withdraw equivalent value in Paris, safer than carrying sacks of silver along bandit-ridden roads. And thus, coins birthed something greater. Trust on parchment, the first whispers of modern finance. Humor in counting houses. Bankers, too, had their jokes. "Gold is heavy," one Florentine said, "but debt is heavier still." Another, writing ledgers late into the night, muttered, "I pray to St. Matthew, patron of accountants, though I suspect he's as tired of sums as I am." In their dry humor lay the beginnings of systems that would one day rule economies far beyond medieval walls. Coins and social climbing. Merchants grew rich. With enough coins, a man might rise higher than his birth. He could buy fine clothes, build a stone house, and even marry into noble families. Some nobles sneered, "He has silver but no blood," to which a merchant replied, "I need no blood, for silver buys more servants than lineage." Coins reshaped society, loosening the grip of old feudal chains and opening doors once closed. The merchant's risk, of course. Trade was not without danger. Ships sank, bandits lurked, and dishonest partners absconded with funds. Merchants often said, "A coin at sea is as safe as a feather in the wind." Yet still they risked, for profit beckoned like a siren's song. Without their courage, coins would never have traveled so far, nor markets grown so bold. Coins as memory. For many merchants, coins were more than profit, they were memory. A Venetian might treasure a Byzantine nomisma, reminding him of deals struck in Constantinople. A Londoner might show a Spanish maravedì as proof of journeys south. Each coin carried stories of voyages, bargains, and friendships forged across language and land. In a way, merchants collected the history of Europe in their purses. From market to kingdom, what began in small stalls and guild halls rippled outward. As merchants grew stronger, kings took notice. Taxes were levied, alliances made, and soon, crowns depended as much on merchant coins as on knightly swords. A kingdom might win wars with armies, but it won peace with commerce, and at the heart of commerce lay the humble coin. So, let us pause in the bustle of the medieval marketplace. Hear the chatter of guildsmen, the laughter of haggling wives, the ringing of scales as coins are weighed. For here, in these noisy, lively spaces, the story of money took a turn. No longer the treasure of kings alone, coins became the lifeblood of trade, the whisper of guilds, and the bold gamble of merchants who carried the medieval world toward something new. A coin in a peasant's hand might buy bread, but in a merchant's hand, it could build bridges, tie cities together, and reshape the very balance of power. Splendid, we now march alongside knights, kings, and pilgrims into distant lands, where banners of the cross and crescent fluttered, and where coins flowed as eagerly as blood in the name of conquest and faith. Coins of conquest, crusades, empires, and the flow of treasure the trumpet sounds. The banners rise. Knights polish armor, peasants whisper prayers, and kings make speeches about glory in God. But behind all the shouting and marching, behind the solemn vows and fiery sermons, something quieter clinks in the shadows of the crusades. Coins, for though the crusaders swore to serve faith, they could not march on prayers alone. Swords, horses, food, shipsoul, demanded silver and gold. And so the story of conquest is also the story of coin. The call to crusade. When Pope Urban II called the First Crusade, many knights took the cross with fiery zeal. Yet even before their boots left their homelands, treasuries groaned. Armor was costly, horses even more so, and a voyage to Jerusalem required ships laden with supplies. A chronicler wryly noted, some knights sold their lands, others pawned their castles, and some even borrowed from merchants they once scorned. Thus, Jerusalem was first conquered, not with swords, but with ledgers. Coins, more than piety, fueled the road east. Banking for the Holy Land, the journey to the Holy Land, was perilous. A knight could scarcely carry all the silver needed without drawing the eye of every brigand along the way. And so rose one of the most curious partnerships of the Middle Ages, the Crusader and the banker. The Knights Templar, famed not only for their swords but for their coffers, offered a clever service. A Crusader could deposit coin in Paris and receive a letter, redeemable in Acre or Jerusalem. Thus was born a form of banking that made holy war a little less risky. The Templars, some said, wielded more power with ink and seal than with lance and shield. A clash of currencies. In the Holy Land, Crusaders encountered coins unlike any they had ever seen. The dinars of Islam gleamed in pure gold, stamped with flowing Arabic script instead of kings' faces. Byzantine nomismas, shining with the image of Christ, carried the weight of an empire. At first, Westerners found these strange coins bewildering. One knight muttered, "This gold has no face. How do I know whose honor I spend?" To which a merchant replied, "Spend it, and you'll find it buys more than honor." Slowly, Crusaders learned the value of dinars and dirhams, adding them to the tangled web of European currencies. Treasure and spoils conquest brought not only holy relics but also treasure. When cities fell, Crusaders gathered gold, silver, and jewels. Some carried them back across the sea, others squandered them in camps on wine and dice. A soldier once joked, "We march to save our souls, yet I fear I'll lose mine to the tavern before I see Jerusalem." Indeed, coins changed as swiftly in taverns as they did in temples. The Byzantine bargain, the Byzantine Empire, caught between Crusaders and the East, became both ally and rival. Its gold coin, the solidus or nomisma, had reigned supreme for centuries. Crusaders admired its purity and often used it as a standard of weight. But relations soured, and in 1204, the Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople. The city's wealth poured into Western hands, chalices melted into coins, jewels reset into crowns, and gold scattered into greedy palms. Thus conquest reshaped not only maps but also treasuries. Coins as propaganda of victory back home, kings and lords boasted of crusading with special coinage. Some minted coins showing crosses, swords, or holy symbols to proclaim their piety. To hold such a coin was to touch a little piece of propaganda, a reminder that one's ruler had marched with Christendom's armies. Of course, not every crusader returned with riches. Many came home poor, their purses empty, their only gain a scallop shell badge or a weary smile. One weary knight quipped, "I left with a purse full of silver, and returned with a sack of blisters. May God at least count the blisters as offerings." The flow of treasure back to Europe, though, many crusaders found ruin. Europe itself grew richer, trade routes opened, spices, silks, and precious metals flowed westward. Coins clinked in new rhythms as Italian cities, like Venice and Genoa, grew wealthy on crusading traffic. It was said Venice profited more from supplying crusaders than from fighting Turks. Perhaps their truest weapon was not the sword but the invoice. Humor of the camps. Life in crusader camps was harsh, but coin never ceased to matter. Soldiers gambled with dice, merchants sold wares, and priests collected offerings for chapels. One chronicler sighed. They prayed at dawn, fought at noon, and gambled at dusk. By night, the coins moved more than the swords. Even on holy campaigns, the sound of coin was constant, the shadow of debt. Many noble families never recovered from crusade debts. Lands mortgaged, treasures pawned, taxes raised, the cost of distant wars lingered for generations. In villages, peasants muttered, "We pay for Jerusalem," though our feet never left the fields. Indeed, conquest left scars not only on holy lands but on European purses. Legacy of crusading coin, yet the mingling of East and West left lasting marks. Arabic numerals, new scales of weight, and foreign coins seeped into Europe. Gold coins, rare for centuries, reappeared in wider use. The florin of Florence, the ducat of Venice, these were children of crusading contact. Coins told the tale of conquest more honestly than songs of glory. For while troubadours sang of knights and martyrs, coins recorded the true price of faith and empire. So let us picture it: a knight kneeling before a holy relic, a merchant weighing a gold dinar, a Venetian banker smiling behind his ledger. The Crusades thundered with war cries and hymns, yet beneath it all was the soft, steady ring of coins. Conquest was written in blood, yes, but also in silver and gold. And long after the banners fell and the armies disbanded, the coins remained, whispering of glory, greed, and the curious truth that even holy war marched to the rhythm of money. Now we turn from kings and crusaders to the quiet fields and simple hearths of the medieval countryside. Here, among plows, cottages, and church bells, the story of coins becomes small, humble, and deeply human. Everyday coins, peasants, villages, and the humble penny. Not every tale of coins belongs to kings or crusaders. Far from castles and battlefields lay the villages, where peasants bent their backs to the earth and measured wealth, not in gold ducats but in pennies, small, simple coins that passed from calloused hands to rough wooden tables. Here, a single penny could mean supper, a candle for the altar, or a mug of ale at the inn. And in this world of furrows and firelight, coins took on lives of their own, humble, yet no less important than the treasures of kings. The humble penny for centuries in much of Europe. The penny, or denier, or pfennig, depending on the tongue, was the foundation of daily life. Made of silver, sometimes copper, it was small but powerful. To a peasant, a penny was no trifle. It bought a loaf of bread, a measure of salt, or a place in the market toll. In a village where barter still lingered, dags for cloth, grain for meat, the penny was the bridge between necessity and convenience. As one villager joked, "Barter feeds my belly, but a penny feeds my pride." Wages and work. Coins entered villages through wages. Laborers hired to till fields, mend roofs, or serve in towns often received payment in pennies. A day's work might earn just a handful, but those little coins stretched far. A peasant might tuck them into a pouch, tie it with string, and hang it close to his chest beneath his tunic, safer from thieves, and perhaps also from greedy relatives. Women, too, earned pennies by selling butter, weaving, or spinning. Many a household survived on the steady drip of small coins rather than the grand showers of gold sung in noble halls. Tithes and taxes, but pennies did not always stay long in peasant purses. The church claimed tithes, the Lord demanded rents, and tolls barred the way to markets. A peasant might sigh, "God takes 1 penny, my Lord takes 2, and the road takes the rest. All I keep is the sound of jingling as they leave me." Yet even as pennies left their hands, peasants trusted that the small coin was their shield against famine and their tool for survival. Coins at the market on market days. Villages came alive. Chickens squawked, children darted, sellers shouted, and at the heart of it all, coins clinked. A penny might buy onions or ale, or perhaps go toward a finer purchase like a woolen cap. A clever child sent by his mother to market often returned with change, though sometimes less than expected, for sweets had a way of luring coins into sticky hands. Merchants always weighed pennies carefully. Shaved coins, those scraped at the edges to steal silver, were a constant fear. If a coin rang dull on the table, the merchant frowned, and a peasant's pride might suffer with it. Inns and alehouses. Coins had a merry life in inns and alehouses. After a day of toil, a man might drop a penny on the counter and receive a tankard of ale. Songs rose, dice rattled, and sometimes coins passed faster here than in the market. A jest ran, "A penny in church saves your soul, but a penny in ale saves your mood. Which is better, I wonder?" Alehouses became coins' playground, where pennies laughed and vanished in equal measure. Weddings and feasts, pennies also jingled at life's milestones. A bride's dowry, often counted in small coins, could change a family's fortune. Guests tossed pennies in celebration, children scrambled to collect them, and the ringing sound was taken as a blessing for prosperity. At feasts, pennies paid musicians, jugglers, and cooks. Though peasants' tables rarely groaned like a king's banquet, the simple joy of meat, bread, and song was worth every coin. Stories around the fire in winter. Peasants sometimes spoke of coins as if they had personalities. One tale went that pennies loved to wander and hated to stay still. Keep a penny in your purse too long, an elder warned, and it will grow legs and walk away. Children laughed. But many secretly believed that careless coins vanished of their own accord, preferring the warmth of inns and markets to the cold of a miser's chest. Coins in charity, despite their struggles, peasants also gave coins in charity. A penny to a beggar, a penny to the poor box at church. It was said that even the smallest gift might shine brightly in heaven. As one villager said, a penny given with love is richer than a chest of gold given with pride. And so, even among the poorest, coins carried not only material, but spiritual weight. Humor of the villagers' peasants had a wry humor about money. One might say, "My lord counts his coins in chests, I count mine in sighs." Another would reply, "Better to count sighs than debts." For sighs are free, their laughter softened the hard edges of life. Even when pennies were few. A penny's journey, if one could follow a single penny, its tale would be long. Earned by a laborer mending a fence, it might pay for cheese at market, then roll into the hand of a merchant, who spends it on wool, which goes to a weaver, whose cloth is bought by a noblewoman. That same penny might later find its way into a tithe box, then into the church's chest, then perhaps melted into new coin years later. Thus, even the humblest coin was part of a grand web, linking peasants, priests, lords, and kings. The strength of the small, though peasants rarely touched gold or large sums, the humble penny held power. 1,000 pennies might repair a church roof, feed a village through winter, or pay a tax demanded by the crown. In numbers, small coins became mighty like peasants themselves, who, though humble alone, could shape the land and the age when bound together. So let us not forget the little penny. While kings boasted with gold and merchants weighed silver, the humble coin in a peasant's purse carried no less meaning. It bought bread, lit candles, cheered taverns, and marked life's milestones. It bore laughter, sorrow, and prayer in equal measure. Coins may tell tales of conquest and empire, but they also tell the quiet story of villages, of simple folk who measured wealth in small circles of silver. And perhaps it is fitting that the penny, so modest and plain, shines brightest when seen not in treasure chests, but in the rough hands of those who needed it most. Let us walk into the soaring stone arches, where coins clinked not in purses, but in offering boxes, where wealth flowed upward into heaven's walls of stone and glass, coining cathedrals, money, and the building of wonders. If the penny was the heartbeat of the village, then cathedrals were the soul of the age, rising like stone ships above towns and cities. Their spires seemed to sail toward heaven. Yet these towering wonders did not grow by prayer alone, they grew by coins. Coins clinked in alms boxes, rolled across treasurers' tables, and poured into the hands of masons and glaziers. Without money, no cathedral would rise, no stained glass would shine, and no bell would toll over the fields. Thus, the story of medieval money cannot be told without the grand tale of how coins built the greatest wonders of the age, the dream of stone. In a small town, one might wake to see scaffolding around a church, stones stacked high, and masons shaping blocks. The bishop or abbot, stirred by visions of grandeur or, perhaps by rivalry with a neighbor's cathedral, would declare, "Let us build a house fit for God himself." Of course, God might have been content with a modest chapel, but bishops dreamed large. And so began the long march of fundraising. Coins in the collection box. First came the humble pennies of townsfolk and peasants. Each Sunday, worshippers dropped coins into the alms box. Some gave freely, others reluctantly, and a few pretended to drop coins while slipping them back into their sleeves. Still, over months and years, these small offerings grew. The church treasurer, eyes sharp as a falcon, counted each coin carefully by candlelight. Every penny meant another stone lifted, another window set, another prayer rising skyward. A villager might whisper, "My penny may not reach heaven, but at least it holds up a wall on the way there." Noble purses and rivalries, of course. The small coins of villagers alone could not raise soaring cathedrals. Wealthy nobles, merchants, and kings opened their purses as well. Some gave out of piety, others from pride, and many from rivalry. If one lord gave a golden chalice, his neighbor might feel compelled to fund a tower taller than his own hall. A merchant who hoped to impress heaven, and perhaps the bishop might donate a new stained glass window bearing his family's crest. Thus competition gilded piety, and coins flowed as much from vanity as from virtue. Indulgences and promises. The church also offered indulgences, pardons for sins in exchange for donations. A coin could shorten time in purgatory, or so it was promised. Many a weary soul gladly gave their pennies, if it meant one less fiery hour beyond the grave. A jester once quipped, "Give a coin, gain a wing, give a purse, and perhaps you'll fly first class." People laughed, but they still dropped their coins in faith and fear alike. The treasury and the builders, once gathered, coins flowed into the cathedral's treasury, often guarded by locks, keys, and suspicious monks. From there, the money paid an army of workers, masons, carpenters, glaziers, sculptors, and even cooks to feed them all. Each coin set a stone in place. Each penny bought mortar, iron nails, or candles to work by night. The workers' hands built, but it was the coins that kept them steady, like the lifeblood of the construction. A mason might joke, the bishop gives his blessing, the people give their coins, and I give my back. Only one of us cannot afford to stop. Coins in glass and stone, the true beauty of coins shown in stained glass and carvings. Imagine a window of radiant blues and reds, telling the story of saints and kings. Behind its glow lay countless pennies, gathered drop by drop. Stone statues of apostles, angels, and even mischievous gargoyles all bore the mark of coin. Some gargoyles were said to mock the wealthy donors who funded them, grimacing, as if to say, "Your money keeps me here forever." And so, the very walls became frozen coins, transmuted into light and stone. Pilgrims and their pennies. Cathedrals also drew pilgrims, whose coins added to the coffers. Relics, bones of saints, scraps of robes, even feathers claimed to be angelic were displayed, drawing crowds who gave offerings. Pilgrims bought badges, candles, and food in the shadow of the rising spires. Their pennies not only built churches, but also enriched towns, weaving cathedral building into the fabric of medieval economies. The long road of building, but cathedrals were slow to rise. Some took 100 years, others more. Generations were born, lived, and died beneath scaffolding, leaving coins behind to finish what they never saw completed. An old woman dropping a penny into the alms box might whisper, "This will not see the roof above my head, but perhaps my grandchildren will." Coins became a thread binding past, present, and future into a single work of faith. Humor of the builders, the masons, and workers, though, saw the matter more practically. One might say, "The bishop dreams of heaven, but I dream of supper." Another, "They say each stone is laid for God, but my hands tell me they are laid for pennies." Their laughter echoed through scaffolding, lightening the back-breaking toil. Cathedrals as banks of faith. Over time, the great cathedrals themselves became banks not only of money, but of faith. People trusted that their coins, no matter how small, became part of something eternal. To walk inside a finished cathedral, sunlight streaming through colored glass, was to see the wealth of 1,000 souls shimmering as one. Each coin, humble or grand, had become a star in that man-made sky. Coins that echo still today. When one steps into those ancient cathedrals, one still feels the weight of those medieval coins. Not in their sound, but in the stones that stand centuries later. Every carving, every arch, every tower is a silent echo of pennies dropped in faith, vanity, or love. Coins, once small in passing, found immortality in walls of stone, and though kings' treasures may have been lost to war, the coins of peasants, nobles, and pilgrims live on in these houses of wonder. So we see how coins built not only bread in markets, but also dreams of heaven-made stone. The penny that once bought ale, when given in faith, might become a spire touching clouds. The noble's gold, when poured into glass, became sunlight eternal. Cathedrals are not just monuments of faith, they are monuments of coins. The jingling purses of peasants, nobles, and pilgrims together raised wonders that outlasted their lifetimes. And perhaps, if you listen closely in the hush of a cathedral, you might still hear the faint echo of pennies clinking, rolling, and falling like prayers made solid in stone. Now we march onto the battlefield, not with swords and spears alone, but with coins clinking in leather purses, feeding the hungry engines of war. War and coin, paying for battles and soldiers. Kings may speak of honor, of banners flying, and of God's will guiding their armies. But soldiers know a simpler truth. Wars are not fought without coins. A sword may glitter, but without pay for food, horses, and mercenaries, that sword soon rests in its scabbard. And so, in the medieval world, every clash of shields and thunder of hooves was echoed by the clink of coins in treasuries, wagons, and purses. The cost of war was never cheap. To raise an army, a king needed more than speeches. He needed wages for soldiers, oats for horses, iron for weapons, and ale for courage. A chronicler once wrote, "An army marches on its feet, but it stumbles without bread, and bread stumbles without silver." Even the most loyal knight expected payment, whether in coin, land, or promises of plunder. Without money, loyalty grew thin, and swords pointed the wrong way. Soldiers and their pay. Foot soldiers were often promised a few pennies a day. To them, this was fortune compared to peasant labor. Yet pay was not always timely. Many a weary soldier grumbled that the king's purse was slower than his horse. One soldier joked, "I fight for coin, but mostly for the hope that someday it arrives." Knights, being costly creatures with armor, horses, and squires, demanded more. They might receive gold or the promise of captured lands. And mercenaries, those sharp blades for hire, refused to fight a single step without advance payment. Coins, not oaths, bound armies together. Mercenaries. Swords for silver. Mercenaries became a hallmark of medieval war. From German lands came fierce pikemen, from Italy crossbowmen, and from far reaches, adventurers seeking fortune. They cared little for the cause. Their loyalty was measured by the weight of coins in their purses. If a rival offered more, they sometimes changed sides mid-battle, leaving astonished kings to wonder whether the coin or the cross truly ruled the field. A bitter joke said, A mercenary's shield is painted with silver, and his banner bears a coin. War chests and taxes. To pay for war, kings gathered great war chests, literal chests of silver and gold. These were hauled in wagons, guarded as carefully as the crown itself. Where did the money come from? Taxes, of course. Peasants groaned as new levies fell upon their harvests. Merchants cursed tolls on trade, and nobles muttered as their purses were squeezed. A weary farmer once sighed, "My plough feeds the soil, but my lord's war feeds only the grave. And both take my pennies." Still, kings pressed on, for without taxes, there was no army, and without armies, there was no crown. Coins and supplies. Coins also purchased the endless supplies an army required. Bread, cheese, salted meat, wine, and beer. These marched alongside soldiers as surely as spears. Horses consumed oats by the cartload, and blacksmiths demanded pay for shoeing hooves and repairing armor. Even camp followers, cooks, washerwomen, and jesters earned their share. In truth, war was less a clash of swords than a river of coins flowing into every corner of the campaign. Plunder and promises. When treasuries ran dry, kings often turned to plunder. Soldiers were promised riches from captured towns, loot from enemy nobles, and spoils from fallen foes. Some soldiers trusted these promises more than the king's shaky coin, yet plunder carried its own chaos. For an army bent on looting often forgot the discipline of battle. Still, the lure of coin kept men marching. One knight muttered, "I fight less for God's will than for my purse's will." The jingle before the battle on the eve of battle. Soldiers often checked their purses more than their swords. Did they carry the advanced pay? Would more arrive if they survived the clash? A common saying spread, "Before battle, a wise man sharpens his blade. A wiser man counts his coins." For what good was valor if one's family starved while he fought? What good was victory if wages never came? Paying the price of defeat if war was costly in victory, it was ruinous in defeat. A king who lost might face ransoms so enormous that whole kingdoms strained to pay them. Captured nobles were not killed but sold back for gold, often more than a small town might see in a lifetime. The ransom of a single duke could bankrupt villages for years. As taxes rose to meet the demand, coins became chains heavier than any prison. Humor among the camps. Despite hardship, soldiers laughed about their pay. One said, "My sword eats more than I do, and it demands silver for every bite." Another replied, "At least your sword does not drink ale. Mine drains my purse faster than the innkeeper." Their humor, bitter though it was, made long marches lighter, even as they dreamed of jingling purses heavier than their armor. Wars that built economies. Strangely, wars also fed economies. Blacksmiths thrived, inns along marching routes flourished, and merchants sold supplies at tidy profits. Coins poured through towns like rivers, and many prospered from war who never lifted a sword. Yet for peasants, coins flowed mostly away into taxes, tolls, and levies. War for them was not profit, but poverty. Coins that chose kings in the end. Coins decided as much as courage. An army well paid fought longer, marched farther, and held firmer. An army starved of wages melted away, no matter the righteousness of its cause. Thus, coins crowned kings as surely as coronations. Thrones rested less on swords than on the silver that fed them. And so, behind every clash of knights and thunder of hooves, behind banners and prayers, there was always the quiet jingle of coins. Coins paid for bread, bridled horses, polished armor, and raised armies. They promised victory, demanded taxes, and lingered in the hands of mercenaries who cared little for banners. The story of medieval war is the story of coins flowing like blood through its veins, deciding battles more quietly than any trumpet. So remember, when you hear of glorious charges and shining armor, listen also for the faint sound of coins rattling in a purse, for often it was silver not steel that won the day. Marvelous. We have walked through the villages, the markets, the cathedrals, and even the battlefields where coins played their silent part. Now we reach the last turning of this long tale. How the quiet coins of the medieval world gave birth to the currencies we know today. The legacy of medieval money. From coins to modern currency, every story must end. Though coins themselves never seem to stop moving. They roll from hand to hand, from age to age, carrying whispers of those who held them before. The pennies, dinars, florins, and ducats of medieval times are long gone, yet their spirit lingers in every dollar, pound, and euro that jingles in our pockets today. This, then, is the final part of our tale, the legacy of medieval money, and how those small, humble coins shape the way the modern world counts, spends, and dreams of wealth. From metal to system in the early medieval days, coins were scattered things, some pure, some clipped, some honest, some false. Value was not always certain, and trust was as fragile as thin silver edges. But through centuries of struggle and reform, a system emerged. Coins became more standardized, more regulated, and more trusted. A penny in England, a denier in France, a pfennig in the German lands, they were not yet the same, but they shared enough kinship to weave trade across borders. It was as if the medieval world slowly learned to speak a common language, the language of money. the rise of banking families, but coins alone were not enough. Imagine merchants trying to carry sacks of silver over mountains or seas. Every thief and bandit would have smiled wide. So, clever minds began to replace coins with promises, letters of credit, bills of exchange, and the earliest forms of banking. Great families, like the Medici in Florence, turned coin into power. They loaned to kings, funded cathedrals, and created systems of trust that stretched across Christendom. A merchant in Venice could pay with a slip of parchment, and his partner in Bruges would hand over goods as though real silver had changed hands. Coins, once heavy and clumsy, learned to travel as words on parchment. The spirit of trust, what coins taught, above all, was trust. Trust that a silver penny truly contained silver, trust that a gold ducat was not clipped, trust that a banker's letter meant what it promised. Without trust, coins were just metal. With trust, they became currency, symbols of faith between strangers. And this lesson is their greatest legacy, for even today, our paper notes and digital balances are only trusted promises, descended from those old coins that once bore kings' faces. Coins to paper. As the medieval age waned and the modern dawn approached, something remarkable occurred. Coins began to give way to paper. In China, this had happened long before, but in Europe, paper money was a late bloom. Early banknotes appeared as certificates backed by coin, whispers of a future where wealth would weigh no more than parchment. Some scoffed at the idea. A grumbling knight might have said, "Paper cannot buy bread. Try throwing it at the baker." Yet in time the baker too accepted paper because behind it stood trust in the coins locked safely in vaults. From local to global, another legacy of medieval money was its role in weaving the world together. Coins carried silk from the East, wool from England, spices from the Levant, and wine from France. Step by step, the clinking of coins became the heartbeat of a global marketplace. The medieval merchant, counting pennies in a market stall, was ancestor to today's banker counting currencies on glowing screens. The coins were small, but their reach became vast. Humor of the ages. Even as money grew more complex, humor followed. Medieval folk joked about coins that walked away from purses. Modern folk joke that money now disappears, even faster, slipping not into taverns, but into taxes, rents, and machines that demand cards instead of coins. One might say in the old days, money jingled before it vanished. Now it vanishes in silence. Perhaps both peasants and bankers would nod together at this truth. Lessons from the penny. The humble medieval penny teaches us still that wealth is not in grandeur, but in small, steady measures. That coins gain meaning only when shared, whether in market, tavern, church, or charity. That even the smallest piece can be part of something greater, like the spires of cathedrals or the armies of kings. The penny, though simple, reminds us that the foundations of our vast, complex economies were laid by countless tiny circles of silver. Echoes in modern pockets today. When we handle coins, though fewer now with cards and phones, they carry the faint memory of medieval times. A dollar coin, a euro, a pound, they all echo the weight of pennies once hidden in peasants' tunics or clutched by merchants in candlelit stalls. The designs may have changed, but the rhythm remains the same. Earn, spend, save, give, lose, and earn again. The old dance of coins continues. Coins that outlast kings, kings and queens, carved their faces into coins, hoping to be remembered forever. Yet most of those rulers are long forgotten, while their coins sit in museum cases, polished and studied. It is a gentle irony. Coins outlast the kings who made them. Perhaps money, not monarchs, is the truest historian of all. Toward the future, from coins to notes, from notes to digital screens, the journey continues. Yet even in the hum of machines and the silence of invisible transactions, the spirit of the medieval coin endures. Every time we exchange, every time we trust a promise of value, we echo those peasants, merchants, and kings who once weighed pennies in the palm of their hand. And perhaps, centuries from now, when money is no longer coins nor paper, but something stranger still, people will look back on our age and smile. They thought coins were old-fashioned, but their credit and cards were just shiny pennies of their own time. So we end our tale, where it began with coins small and humble, yet mighty in their legacy. From the first clinking pennies of villages to the soaring cathedrals built of countless offerings, from soldiers' wages to merchants' ledgers, coins shaped the medieval world. And from that world grew the money we live with today. The story of coins is the story of us, our needs, our hopes, our fears, our humor. And though the shapes may change, metal, paper, digital, the heart of money remains the same, a circle of trust, passing from hand to hand, from age to age. And if you listen closely, perhaps you will hear it still, that ancient, calming sound, the soft, steady jingle of coins, telling the quiet story of humanity's wealth. And so, dear listener, our long road comes to an end. We have wandered through markets and fields, watched coins build cathedrals, feed soldiers, and outlast the kings who stamped their faces upon them. From the humble penny to the golden ducat, from peasants' purses to merchants' ledgers, we have seen how money shaped the medieval world and how its spirit still lingers in the coins and notes we hold today. Remember this: Wealth is not always in treasures or crowns. Sometimes it rests in small, steady coins shared among many hands, in laughter over ale, or in the quiet faith of a single penny dropped in an alms box. So carry the story with you, like a coin tucked close to the heart. For though our tale ends here, the gentle jingle of history never truly fades.